It was a Friday morning in Riverside, California, November 18, 2011. The air carried the kind of crisp coolness you only get in late fall. Most people in the River Glen apartment complex were just starting their day. A few cars idled in the parking lot, their exhaust curling into thin clouds in the cold air. Some residents walked their dogs, coffee mugs in hand, their conversations casual and routine. That quiet, almost sleepy rhythm was broken at exactly 7:36 a.m., when a sharp, hollow thud echoed through the courtyard. It wasn't the sound of something being dropped, it was heavier, final. People turned toward the source and froze. On the concrete just outside the main entrance lay a man in his mid-20s, sprawled awkwardly, his limbs twisted in ways they shouldn't be. A small pool of blood began to spread beneath his head. Some residents rushed forward but stopped short, instinctively sensing there was nothing they could do. The man's face was pale under his light tan skin. A faded leather jacket clung to him, the right sleeve torn at the cuff. Someone recognized him immediately. Lucas Vega, a garage mechanic who had been in and out of the complex for years. He wasn't a tenant, at least not officially, but he was known to spend nights here with his girlfriend, or rather, his former girlfriend. Within minutes, the wail of sirens approached, bouncing off the stucco walls of the complex. 2 Riverside patrol cars skidded to a stop, followed by an ambulance. Paramedics approached the body, but after a brief examination, they exchanged silent glances and shook their heads. There would be no resuscitation. At first, it looked like the morning had claimed another tragic fall, maybe a suicide. But one of the officers, a tall man with close-cropped hair named Detective Ryan Holloway, noticed something that made his stomach knot. Lucas had come from one of the third-floor balconies, apartment 3B if Holloway remembered correctly. And Holloway knew that apartment. He'd been there once before, months earlier, responding to a noise complaint. While one team began securing the courtyard, another moved toward the stairwell. A few residents trailed behind, whispering to each other, exchanging versions of what they thought they'd seen. The closer they got to 3B, the more uneasy Holloway felt. The apartment door was closed, but a faint metallic smell, coppery and sharp, was already seeping into the hallway. The officers knocked. No answer. They called out, announcing themselves. Still nothing. Holloway nodded to his partner, and together they forced the door open. The first thing they saw was the blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the beige carpet, smeared along the hallway walls, pooled on the laminate floor of the living room. A toppled chair lay on its side near the kitchen island, one of its legs cracked clean off. A phone cord trailed across the floor, its end frayed as if it had been ripped violently from the wall. And then the bodies. 3 of them were lying in separate places as if frozen mid-escape. Closest to the door was a young man with sandy blonde hair, later identified as Tyler Grant, 21. His torso was at an awkward angle, his shirt soaked dark with blood. Near the hallway to the bedrooms lay a woman in a forest green sweater, Lauren Brooks, 23. Her eyes were closed, her expression eerily calm, but her skin had already lost its warmth. In the master bedroom, sprawled partially across the bed, was another young woman, Emily Collins, 22. Her hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, now matted with blood. Her hands, covered in defensive wounds, told the story of someone who had fought until the very end. And then amid the stillness came a sound, a faint, shallow breath. On the far side of the bed, crumpled against the nightstand, was Rachel Collins, 19. Her hoodie was torn at the collar, the skin of her neck bearing a deep, jagged wound. Blood had soaked into the fabric, but she was alive. Barely. Paramedics rushed in, carefully lifting Rachel onto a stretcher. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't speak. Whether she couldn't or wouldn't, no one knew yet. Holloway followed them out for a moment, watching as she was loaded into the ambulance. Then he turned back to the scene, his mind running through possibilities, but every instinct told him this wasn't random. This was personal. Back inside, crime scene techs were already at work. The kitchen counters held 2 empty beer bottles, their labels peeled halfway off. On the living room coffee table lay a folded sheet of paper, its edges spotted with fresh droplets of blood. Holloway picked it up with gloved hands. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, like it had been scrawled in a hurry. Rachel, I loved you. If I can't have you, no one can. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I failed at everything. I'm nothing. LV. The weight of the words settled over him like lead. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was premeditated rage. He glanced toward the balcony door, its glass still fogged from the cold outside, and imagined Lucas standing there just minutes earlier, looking out before stepping over the rail. Outside, the crowd had grown. Neighbors, drawn by the noise and flashing lights, gathered in small clusters. Some stood silently, arms folded against the chill. Others spoke in hushed tones, speculating, asking each other if they'd seen or heard anything. Holloway knew the scene would be on the news within the hour. Reporters would descend, eager for details. But for now, his focus was on the victims, on understanding what had happened inside these walls in the hours before the sun came up. Rachel Collins was the only one who could tell that story, if she survived. And somewhere deep down, Holloway suspected that the answers wouldn't just be in what she said, but in what she hadn't said for months leading up to this morning. In Riverside, most apartment complexes looked the same from the outside: stucco walls in neutral tones, balconies with potted plants, blinds half closed against the California sun. River Glen was no exception. But for those who knew the Collins sisters, apartment 3B wasn't just another unit, it was a small, self-made world they had built away from their parents' home. Rachel Collins, the younger of the two, was 19, a freshman at the University of California, Riverside. Her friends described her as quiet, more comfortable in a hoodie and jeans than anything that drew attention. She'd always been the type to listen more than speak, a quality that made people feel safe telling her their problems, but also made her slow to set boundaries. Her older sister, Emily, was almost the opposite. At 22, she was confident, outspoken, and fiercely protective of Rachel. She had taken on the role of caretaker after their mother passed away when Rachel was still in high school. Emily worked as an assistant manager at a local bookstore, balancing long shifts with making sure the bills were paid and the apartment was stocked. When the sisters decided to share an apartment, Emily made one thing clear: she wanted their home to be a safe place. But that definition was tested the moment Vega entered the picture. Lucas had grown up on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where kids learned early that respect had to be earned, sometimes by force. He dropped out of high school at 17, started working at a garage run by his uncle, and developed a reputation for being quick with his hands, both in fixing engines and in throwing punches when provoked. Rachel met him at a small car show on campus during her senior year of high school. He was leaning against a custom motorcycle, half listening to his friends talk, when she stopped to look at the bike. Lucas wasn't the kind to smile easily, but something about her curiosity softened him. Their first conversation was awkward but genuine. Over the next few months, Lucas became a fixture in Rachel's life. He drove her to and from classes, brought her takeout when she stayed up late studying, and introduced her to his friends at the garage. For Rachel, it was intoxicating. Someone older, streetwise, protective in a way that felt different from Emily's careful watching. Emily, however, saw something else. She noticed the way Lucas's mood could shift without warning, how he'd grip Rachel's arm a little too tightly when making a point, or how his voice would rise when he thought she wasn't listening. Emily said nothing at first, figuring it wasn't her place to interfere. But by the time Rachel started college, Lucas was spending more nights at their apartment than at his own place. The first real clash came over something small: space. Lucas treated the apartment like a second home, leaving his jackets draped over chairs, his motorcycle helmet on the kitchen counter, tools on the balcony. Emily confronted him one evening, her voice calm but firm. "Lucas, this is our place. You're here a lot, but you don't live here. I need you to respect that." Lucas shrugged it off. "I'm not hurting anything. I'm here with Rachel." That was the start of an unspoken tension. Emily's disapproval simmered just under the surface, and Lucas felt it every time they were in the same room. Rachel tried to bridge the gap, but her reluctance to take sides made the divide wider. The breaking point came at a casual get-together in late October. Emily had invited a few friends over, and Lucas arrived halfway through the night, dropping onto the couch beside Rachel. Conversations flowed until Emily, half joking but with an edge in her tone, said in front of everyone, "You're here more than anyone, Lucas. Maybe you should start chipping in on the rent." The room went quiet for a beat, then laughter bubbled from a few guests. Lucas forced a grin, nodding once. "Sure. I'll talk to Rachel about it." But the moment stuck with him. To Lucas, it wasn't about money, it was about being challenged in front of others, made to feel like an outsider in Rachel's life. Over the next 2 weeks, the tension turned into open hostility. Emily followed up on the rent comment, reminding Rachel that Lucas should contribute if he was staying over so often. Rachel, caught in the middle, brought it up to Lucas one night. "I thought we talked about this," he snapped. "You know, I was just trying to keep the peace that night. I'm not paying to be somewhere 3 nights a month." "It's not about the money," Rachel said quietly. "It's about respect." That word, respect, hit him like a slap. In Lucas's world, respect wasn't given freely, it had to be defended, even from people close to you. From that moment, Emily stopped hiding her dislike. She told Lucas directly that if he wouldn't contribute, he needed to stop coming by uninvited. She also asked for the spare key back. Lucas refused, calling it a power move to push him out of Rachel's life. Rachel hated conflict. She told herself it would blow over, that Lucas would calm down and Emily would let it go. But instead, Lucas began showing signs of paranoia. If Rachel didn't answer his calls right away, he'd text repeatedly. If she mentioned talking to a male classmate, he'd ask for details, too many details. To Rachel, it was suffocating. To Lucas, it was survival, keeping what he saw as his from slipping away. By early November, Emily had made up her mind. She and Rachel would change the locks. Rachel resisted at first, but after a long night of arguments and slammed doors, she gave in. On the evening of November 15th, Emily and Lauren Brooks, her best friend who often stayed over, replaced the deadbolt while Rachel was at class. Lucas didn't find out until 3 days later, when he came by and his key no longer worked. He knocked. No answer. He called. Straight to voicemail. Through the thin door, he heard muffled voices, Emily's laugh, Lauren's low reply, and it felt like a wall had gone up, shutting him out completely. That night, Lucas didn't go home. He sat in his car across the street, engine idling, watching the apartment windows flicker with light until they went dark. Inside, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She told herself this was for the best. She didn't see the shadow of Lucas's car in the lot below. She didn't know he was still there, rehearsing in his mind all the ways he could make things right, or make them final. After the lock was changed, Lucas Vega didn't return to River Glen right away. Not physically, at least. But he was there in his mind, over and over, replaying the image of the doorknob that no longer turned for him, the sound of muffled voices behind it, and the laughter that he couldn't quite place. In the days that followed, his routine shifted. At the garage, he stopped lingering around customers, stopped joking with coworkers. He kept his head down, finishing repairs quickly and spending long minutes just staring into the open hood of a car as if it might give him answers. By the second day, his uncle, who owned the shop, asked if he was all right. Lucas shrugged it off with the kind of answer people give when they don't want to be asked again. But Lucas's nights were different. He wasn't sleeping. He drove aimlessly through Riverside after dark, the city's lights blurring in his vision. More than once, he found himself parking across from the apartment complex, sitting in the shadow of a jacaranda tree, watching the windows of 3B until they went dark. Sometimes he'd see Emily walk past the blinds, her ponytail swaying as she carried a laundry basket. Other times he'd catch a glimpse of Rachel, leaning over the kitchen counter, phone in hand. There were nights he thought about knocking, about demanding his place back, but the memory of that locked door burned too deep. On November 16th, Lucas tried calling Rachel. She didn't answer. He left a message, his voice low but tight. "Ratch, it's me. I just want to talk. Call me back." She didn't. Later that day, he texted her, "I'm not your enemy. Don't make me one." No reply. By the evening of November 17th, frustration had boiled into something sharper. At 8:42 p.m., he called again. This time, Rachel picked up. Her voice was quiet. "Lucas, I don't think we should see each other anymore." There was a long pause on his end. "You don't think, or you don't want to?" "I know I don't want to," she said. "This isn't working." Lucas let out a short, humorless laugh. "After everything? After 3 years? It's not about the time, Lucas. It's about how we are. I can't do this anymore." He didn't remember hanging up, but at some point the call ended. The phone slipped from his hand and landed on the passenger seat. He sat in the car outside his apartment, the dashboard clock glowing 9:05 p.m., the engine still running. That night, Lucas went to the Red Lantern, a dimly lit bar a few blocks from the garage. He ordered a beer, then another, then switched to whiskey. The bartender, a man in his 50s who'd seen his share of heartbreak walk through the door, noticed Lucas staring blankly at the glass. "You look like you lost a fight," the bartender said. Lucas smirked faintly. "Not yet." By midnight, the smirk was gone. The whiskey had dulled the edges of his thoughts, but underneath, the same loop kept playing. Rachel's voice, calm and final, telling him it was over. He thought about how she'd looked at him the last time they were together, not with anger but with distance, like she'd already stepped out of the picture and left him in the frame alone. He left the bar just before closing, the cold air hitting his face hard enough to sober him slightly. His car was parked under a flickering streetlight, and in the back seat, 2 kitchen knives wrapped in an old towel lay hidden beneath a hoodie. He'd put them there earlier in the week, telling himself it was for protection. But that night he didn't believe his own excuse. November 18th began like any other Friday for Rachel and Emily. Emily had the day off and planned to clean the apartment. Rachel had a morning lecture but no other classes. Lauren Brooks had stayed over the night before, and Tyler Grant had come by after his late shift to join them for breakfast. Inside 3B the mood was easy. The four of them sat around the small dining table, plates of scrambled eggs and toast between them. Tyler teased Emily about the stack of laundry in the corner. Lauren scrolled through her phone, reading aloud a headline about a local festival. Rachel smiled, but her mind was elsewhere, wondering if Lucas would try to reach her again. At 8:10 a.m. her phone buzzed with a text. She didn't check it right away, but when she did, her stomach tightened. It was from Lucas. "We need to talk. Don't make me come find you." Emily noticed her sister's expression change. "Who is it?" "No one," Rachel said quickly, locking her phone. But Emily had seen enough to know. She stood up, clearing plates, and said casually, "If he shows up here, he's not getting in." "I mean it." Rachel didn't argue. She knew Emily meant every word. Meanwhile, Lucas was in his apartment, sitting at the edge of his bed. The blinds were drawn, casting stripes of pale morning light across the floor. His phone lay face down beside him, the screen dark. He thought about calling again, about showing up and forcing a conversation. He thought about how easy it would be to make his case if Rachel would just listen without Emily there. But that was the problem. Emily was always there, always between them. The more he thought about it, the less it felt like a breakup and the more it felt like an eviction. From Rachel's life, from the place he thought he belonged. By mid-morning, he'd made a decision. It wasn't sudden, it had been taking shape for weeks, maybe months. He grabbed the towel-wrapped knives from his car, slid them into a worn backpack and zipped it shut. As he locked his apartment door behind him, a neighbor nodded hello. Lucas nodded back, his expression unreadable. The sun was bright, the air cool, but inside Lucas Vega's head, the temperature had dropped to something far below freezing. And with every step toward River Glen, he wasn't just walking to an address. He was walking to the place where everything, love, anger, pride, was about to collapse into something no one could take back. By the time Lucas Vega reached River Glen, the sun was already dipping behind the low line of buildings to the west. The air had cooled, and the long shadows in the courtyard seemed to stretch toward the stairwells like dark fingers. He didn't rush. He never looked up at the balconies. He walked straight across the lot, past a cluster of residents talking by the mailboxes, his eyes locked on the third-floor walkway. From the outside, apartment 3B looked quiet. The blinds in the living room window were drawn, a faint glow seeping through the slats. Lucas could hear something, a muffled voice, maybe laughter, but it was too indistinct to tell who it belonged to. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the backpack on his shoulder. Inside, wrapped in an old towel, were the two knives. One was a chef's knife, the other a smaller utility blade. They were ordinary tools, the kind you'd see in any kitchen. But in Lucas's mind, they had become something else entirely, answers to questions he couldn't stop asking himself. Inside 3B, the night had settled into an easy rhythm. Rachel Collins sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her legs tucked beneath her. Emily was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, while Lauren Brooks leaned against the counter, talking about a trip she and Tyler were planning for the holidays. Tyler himself was stretched out in the recliner, flipping channels on the TV. It wasn't a party, just four people who felt safe enough in each other's company to let their guard down. But Rachel's phone sat face down on the coffee table, and every so often her eyes flicked toward it. She hadn't told anyone about the last message from Lucas earlier that afternoon. "We're not done." Lucas didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He pulled the spare key from his jacket pocket, a key Emily believed he'd returned months ago, and slid it into the lock. It turned. The first sound inside was the click of the deadbolt. Tyler looked up from the recliner, his brow furrowing. Before anyone could speak, the door swung open. Lucas stepped in, closing it behind him with a deliberate motion. He set the backpack on the floor and stood there for a moment, scanning the room. His gaze landed on Rachel, then shifted to Emily and finally to Tyler. Nobody moved. Emily was the first to speak. "You need to leave, Lucas." Lucas didn't answer. He unzipped the backpack slowly, the rasp of the zipper cutting through the quiet. He pulled out the larger knife and held it at his side, not in a raised threat but as if it belonged there, like another piece of him. Tyler pushed himself up from the recliner. "Man, whatever this is." Lucas cut him off. "Sit down." The tone in his voice wasn't loud, but it had an edge sharp enough to make Tyler hesitate. Rachel's breath quickened. "Lucas, please, this isn't the way." He looked at her, and for a moment there was something almost pleading in his expression. The way was 3 years. The way was building something together. And you, he jerked his head toward Emily, you tore it apart. Emily stepped forward, careful but steady. Rachel made her own choice. You don't belong here anymore. Lucas's jaw tightened. He took a slow step toward her. You've been in the way since day one. Lauren moved then, slipping between Emily and Lucas. Back off. Right now. It happened fast after that. Lucas shoved Lauren aside and she stumbled into the kitchen counter. Tyler lunged forward, but Lucas swung the knife upward, forcing him back. The air in the apartment shifted, from tense to volatile in an instant. Rachel's eyes darted toward her phone on the coffee table. She knew she had one chance. While Lucas's attention was on Tyler, she grabbed it, sliding it under a cushion as she unlocked it by touch. Her fingers trembled, but she managed to open a message to her father. She didn't type words, just two, help me. She hit send and slid the phone deeper into the couch, her heart hammering in her chest. Lucas turned back to Emily. You think you can lock me out? You think you can make me disappear? Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were steady, but Rachel could see the tension in her sister's jaw, the way her hands flexed at her sides. Lucas took another step and Emily matched it, refusing to retreat. The space between them was shrinking, and Rachel could feel the air getting heavier with each breath. Outside, the walkway was empty. The laughter from the mailboxes had faded, replaced by the hum of a distant freeway. The night around River Glen was quiet, quiet enough that no one heard the sharp crash from inside 3B as a chair toppled over. Inside, Tyler had moved toward the door, trying to position himself between Lucas and the rest of the room. You're not doing this, he said. Lucas's voice was almost calm. I already am. The knife caught the light from the kitchen, a quick flash before he stepped forward again. Rachel wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. She knew what was coming. She also knew that once it started, there would be no going back. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if her father would get there in time, or if he'd be too late to open the door that Lucas had already forced wide open. The silence in apartment 3B stretched long enough for everyone to feel it tightening around them. Lucas Vega stood just inside the doorway, his presence heavy, his eyes moving from one face to the next as if taking inventory. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock above the TV. Then Lucas bent down and pulled the chef's knife from the backpack. He didn't raise it, just held it in his right hand, the blade catching a glint from the kitchen light. His breathing was steady, but there was a stiffness in his posture that told everyone in the room he'd already made his decision. Sit down, he said quietly. Tyler Grant took a half step forward, his voice firm. You need to leave before this gets worse. Lucas's eyes flicked to him. Worse? This is already worse. Rachel's throat felt dry. Lucas, we can talk. He cut her off. No. We've talked. We've talked for months. And you let her? He pointed the knife toward Emily. Decide for you. Emily didn't flinch. I didn't decide anything for her. You did this yourself. Something in Lucas's jaw shifted, like a small crack running through concrete. He moved quickly, crossing the space toward Emily in 3 steps. Tyler moved to intercept, but Lucas turned sharply, the tip of the blade halting him mid-stride. Lauren Brooks, still by the kitchen counter, reached for her phone in her sweater pocket, but Lucas caught the movement. Don't. The word was low, but it froze her in place. Rachel's eyes darted toward the couch cushion where she'd hidden her own phone earlier. She could feel the outline of it pressing against her thigh. She knew her father had seen the message by now, help me, but she didn't know how much time they had left. Emily shifted slightly, angling herself between Lucas and Rachel. You're not scaring me, she said. Lucas took another step. His voice was almost calm, but his eyes gave him away, restless, searching, like a man trying to find a way out of a burning building that he'd set on fire himself. I'm not here to scare you, he said. I'm here to finish this. The first movement was sudden. Tyler lunged, grabbing Lucas's knife arm. They collided hard, the two of them crashing into the coffee table. The table's legs gave way, sending a stack of magazines sliding across the floor. Rachel sprang from the couch, reaching for Emily's arm. We have to go. But Lucas wrenched free from Tyler's grip, shoving him backward into the recliner. The chair tipped halfway before slamming back down. Tyler gasped, clutching his side. Emily pulled Rachel behind her. Get in the bedroom and lock the door. Rachel hesitated, her eyes fixed on Lucas. His face was flushed, strands of hair falling across his forehead. His grip on the knife was tight enough to whiten his knuckles. Lauren finally moved, stepping into his line of sight. Lucas, listen to me. Stay back, he snapped. The apartment had shrunk. Every corner seemed closer, every doorway narrower. The air was hot with the mix of adrenaline and fear. Rachel felt Emily push her toward the hallway. She stumbled but kept moving, her eyes darting back to see Tyler trying to stand again, Lauren holding her hands out in a placating gesture, and Lucas pivoting toward them like a predator deciding which way to strike. In the bedroom, Rachel slammed the door and twisted the lock. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone again. She typed one more message, "He's inside." Out in the living room, Emily's voice was sharp. "You're not going to hurt her." Lucas laughed once, a short, bitter sound. "You really think you can stop me?" Lauren took a cautious step forward, but Lucas's head turned toward her with such speed that she froze mid-step. Then from the hallway came the faint sound of Rachel's phone buzzing. Lucas's eyes narrowed. Who's she talking to? Emily moved to block him again. "It's over, Lucas. You need to." She didn't finish. Lucas stepped in close, his voice dropping low enough that only Emily could hear. "I decide when it's over." Tyler lunged again, this time aiming low, tackling Lucas around the waist. The two of them crashed into the side of the couch, the knife scraping against the armrest. Lauren darted forward, grabbing at Lucas's wrist. For a second it seemed like they might overpower him. But Lucas twisted violently, breaking free, and the three of them scattered, Tyler stumbling toward the recliner, Lauren retreating toward the kitchen, Emily backing up toward the hallway. Rachel opened the bedroom door a crack, just enough to see Emily moving toward her, but Lucas was right behind. "Go!" Emily shouted. Rachel slammed the door again, locking it, her pulse pounding in her ears. Outside the apartment, the walkway was still empty, but somewhere in the parking lot, the low growl of a car engine pulled in. Headlights swept across the courtyard, briefly illuminating the yellow numbers on the apartment doors. Inside, Lucas's breathing was heavier now, his steps slower but deliberate. The knife never left his hand. He glanced toward the balcony, then back to the hallway, calculating. The front door was still closed. The night outside was still quiet. And Lucas Vega knew, if he wanted to leave his mark, he was running out of time. The tension in apartment 3B had reached the point where even the smallest movement felt dangerous. Everyone knew it. Every breath was measured, every step calculated. Lucas Vega's gaze swept the room like a searchlight, always landing back on Rachel Collins. Rachel, still half hidden behind Emily, could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She kept her eyes on Lucas's hands, not his face, watching for the smallest sign that he might close the distance. Tyler Grant shifted his weight forward, his body angled like a shield. "This isn't going to end how you think," he said. Lucas's expression didn't change. "It ends when I say it ends." Lauren Brooks, still by the kitchen counter, tried again. "Lucas, you can walk away from this right now. Nobody has to get hurt." Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly where they rested at her sides. Somewhere outside, the muffled sound of tires crunching over gravel carried up to the third floor. Lucas's head tilted slightly, his ear catching the noise. He moved toward the balcony door, sliding it open just enough to glance down into the courtyard. A dark sedan had pulled into the lot. A man stepped out quickly, broad shoulders, a purposeful stride. Rachel recognized him instantly. "Dad?" she whispered under her breath. Lucas turned back into the room, closing the balcony door with deliberate calm. "Looks like we've got company," he said. Inside, the dynamic shifted. Tyler's eyes flicked toward the front door, gauging distance. Emily's posture tightened, one arm still angled in front of Rachel as if she could physically keep her sister from whatever came next. The knock at the door was sharp and fast. "Rachel? Emily? It's me, open up." Rachel's father's voice was clear, carrying through the apartment. Nobody moved. Lucas stood still, the knife still in his grip. His voice was low, almost conversational. "If you open that door, this gets ugly." Emily's voice cut back just as quietly. "It's already ugly." The knock came again, harder this time. "Rachel, are you okay?" Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to tell him to call the police, but the weight of Lucas's stare pinned the words down before they reached her lips. From outside, another voice joined in, deeper, more urgent. "Riverside PD. Open the door." Rachel's father must have called 911. For a brief moment, everyone froze. Lucas's breathing quickened. His eyes darted from the door to Rachel, then to the balcony. Tyler saw the shift and moved. He lunged again, this time with everything he had, slamming into Lucas and driving him back against the wall near the door. The knife clattered to the floor, skidding toward the kitchen. Lauren reacted instantly, kicking the blade further out of reach. "Get to the door," she shouted. Emily grabbed Rachel's arm and pulled her toward the entrance. But Lucas roared in frustration, shoving Tyler off with a burst of strength and grabbing Emily by the shoulder. Rachel felt her sister's grip break away. The front door shook under the pounding from outside. Police, step away from the door. Rachel stumbled forward, twisting the deadbolt with trembling fingers. As soon as it clicked, the door burst open, and two uniformed officers flooded the room, their presence filling the space with a force that changed everything instantly. "Drop it. Hands where we can see them," one officer shouted. Lucas stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. His eyes flicked to Rachel, then to the knife on the floor near the kitchen. For a heartbeat, no one knew which way he'd go. Then, in a motion that surprised everyone, he stepped back toward the balcony door. "Don't," an officer barked, but Lucas had already yanked it open. Rachel's father pushed into the apartment, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on her. "Rachel." She shook her head quickly. "Don't he's." But Lucas was already halfway over the balcony rail. The officers moved, but it was too late. Lucas vaulted over, disappearing from view. A split second later, the sound came, a hollow, heavy impact from the courtyard below. Everything after that felt like it happened in fragments. One officer rushed to the balcony to confirm. Another moved to check the kitchen and hallway. Tyler sat on the recliner, breathing hard, his hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Lauren leaned against the counter, eyes closed, murmuring something under her breath. Rachel collapsed into her father's arms, the weight of the last hour finally breaking through. Emily stood beside them, one hand on Rachel's back, the other pressed to her own temple. From below, the call came up from an officer on the ground. "He's gone." The apartment was quiet again, except for the sound of radios crackling and the low murmur of police voices. But this was a different kind of quiet. One that came after chaos when everything still felt too sharp, too close. Rachel didn't look toward the balcony. She didn't want the image in her mind. She focused on the fact that she was still standing, that Emily was still beside her, that her father's arms were still around her. But she knew nothing about life in apartment 3B would ever be the same. Outside, paramedics moved toward the courtyard. Yellow tape was already going up, stretching across the walkway. Neighbors stood at a distance, their faces pale, some whispering, some just staring. For them, this was the end of a shocking scene. For Rachel, it was the point where survival began, and where the work of trying to live with what had happened would haunt her long after the tape came down. When the yellow tape went up around River Glen, the noise of the night finally gave way to something heavier: silence. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort but lingers, settling into the walls, the furniture, the very air inside apartment 3B. The first responders moved methodically, their voices low, their steps careful. Lucas Vega's body was already in the custody of the coroner's team, covered and lifted into a waiting van. Down in the courtyard, a few neighbors still watched from behind the tape, arms crossed against the cool air, faces pale with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Inside, the officers worked quickly. Statements were taken. Evidence was photographed. The chef's knife lay tagged and bagged in the kitchen, its blade free of fresh marks but still carrying the weight of everything that almost happened. Rachel Collins sat on the couch between her father and Emily, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't remember who put it there. Her hands were clasped in her lap, fingers locking and unlocking without her noticing. The warmth of the blanket couldn't touch the cold knot in her chest. Lauren Brooks sat opposite them, answering an officer's questions. Tyler Grant was nearby, an ice pack pressed to his ribs. Detective Ryan Holloway stepped in from the balcony, his notebook in hand. His eyes swept the room once more before he crouched beside Rachel. "You're safe now," he said, his tone measured. "But I need to ask you, had Lucas threatened you before tonight?" Rachel hesitated. The truth was tangled. There hadn't been threats in the way the detective meant. No shouted ultimatums, no text messages with clear danger. But there had been moments, small and sharp, that carried the same weight. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Not in words. But yes." Holloway nodded, jotting something down. "We'll need to follow up in the next few days. Take your time." In the days that followed, the story of what happened at River Glen spread quickly. The local paper ran it under the headline "Riverside Confrontation Ends in Tragedy." Television news showed aerial shots of the complex, the balcony where Lucas made his final move. Some neighbors painted Lucas as troubled but quiet, the kind of man you wouldn't expect to do something like this. Others said they'd seen it coming: too many late-night arguments, too many times he'd sat in his car in the parking lot long after midnight. The police report laid out the timeline in black and white. Lucas Vega arrived at 3B at approximately 8:30 p.m., entered using a key he was not authorized to have, confronted the occupants and brandished a weapon. The arrival of Rachel's father and police officers escalated the standoff, ending when Lucas fled to the balcony and jumped. For Rachel, the days after were a blur. She stayed at her father's house, her phone turned off more often than on. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by flashes of the moment Lucas stepped through the door, the sound of the deadbolt turning, the look in his eyes when he scanned the room. Emily tried to keep her busy, helping her file paperwork, making her tea, talking about things that had nothing to do with that night. But Rachel could feel the edges of her world had changed. Every knock at the door made her tense. Every shadow in the parking lot felt like it might move. Lauren and Tyler visited often. They brought food, stories, anything to remind Rachel of normalcy. But they carried their own weight from that night. Lauren replaying the moment she almost pulled out her phone, Tyler replaying the split-second decision to lunch. The investigation into Lucas's life revealed a pattern. Jobs started and abandoned, friendships that ended abruptly, a series of strained relationships where jealousy and control had been constant undercurrents. There were no prior arrests for violence, but several acquaintances admitted they had kept their distance from him in recent years. In the coroner's report, his cause of death was blunt force trauma from the fall. Toxicology showed elevated alcohol levels. The backpack, retrieved from the apartment floor, contained only the 2 knives and a crumpled photograph of Lucas and Rachel from their first year together. Detective Holloway's final note in the case file was brief. This was not a sudden act. It was the end of a line he'd been walking for a long time. Months later, Rachel stood on the edge of the River Glen parking lot for the first time since that night. The balcony looked the same, the beige stucco unchanged. The apartment had been cleaned, repainted, rented to new tenants who knew nothing of what had happened there. Emily was beside her, quiet. "Are you ready?" Emily asked. Rachel exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'm here." They didn't go inside. They didn't need to. The visit wasn't about revisiting the scene. It was about reclaiming the part of Riverside that had been stolen from her. The lesson of that night lived with all of them. The danger of ignoring the signs, of hoping someone will change simply because you love them. In the end, Lucas Vega hadn't been a stranger who broke in. He'd been let in long before the locks changed. And when the door finally opened for the last time, he brought with him not just a weapon, but the weight of every moment where silence had stood in place of action. That was the story of the Riverside apartment massacre. A story not about how it ended, but about all the places where it could have ended sooner, if someone had been willing to close the door and never open it again.